Tonight, as you settle into comfort, let's journey back through time to explore one of history's most significant moments. We're going to discover how a world that seemed stable and prosperous gradually shifted toward conflict through a series of interconnected events and growing tensions. Close your eyes and let your mind wander to the early 1900s, when Europe was experiencing unprecedented growth and change. Picture yourself in the year 1900. The Victorian era was drawing to a close, and the world felt full of possibility. Electric lights were beginning to illuminate city streets, automobiles were becoming more common, and scientific discoveries were transforming daily life. Yet, beneath this surface of progress, subtle currents were beginning to flow that would eventually reshape the entire world. The story we're about to explore isn't one of sudden violence, but rather a gradual accumulation of pressures, misunderstandings, and competing interests that slowly built over more than a decade. Like water slowly filling a basin, these tensions rose imperceptibly until they finally overflowed in the summer of 1914. Let's begin our gentle exploration with the first of these building pressures, something historians call militarism. In the peaceful quiet of your evening, imagine the shipyards of Britain and Germany at the dawn of the 20th century. The sound of hammers on steel, the hiss of steam, and the steady rhythm of industrial progress. Britain had long considered itself the master of the seas. For centuries, the Royal Navy had protected British trade routes and maintained the empire's connections across the globe. British naval supremacy seemed as natural and permanent as the tides themselves. The British people took comfort in knowing that their island nation was protected by the world's most powerful fleet. But in Germany, a different vision was taking shape. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German emperor, looked out at the world and saw his nation's growing industrial might. Germany's factories were producing more steel than Britain's. German scientists were making remarkable discoveries. German culture was flourishing. Yet Germany remained largely a land-based power. Watching as other nations controlled the world's sea lanes, the Kaiser decided that Germany deserved what he called a place in the sun. This meant building a navy that could challenge British dominance. In 1898, Germany began construction of a modern battle fleet. The German naval laws of 1898 and 1900 committed the country to building a force of powerful warships that could project German power across the oceans. Britain watched this development with growing concern. The island nation's very survival depended on its ability to import food and raw materials from across the empire. If Germany could challenge British naval supremacy, Britain's lifeline would be threatened. The response was swift and decisive. In 1906, Britain launched HMS Dreadnought, a revolutionary battleship that made all previous warships obsolete. The Dreadnought was faster, more heavily armed, and better protected than any ship that had come before it. But rather than ending the naval competition, this innovation simply raised the stakes. Germany responded by building its own Dreadnought-class battleships. Britain built more in response. Each side sought to maintain an advantage, but their efforts only escalated the competition. Between 1906 and 1914, both nations poured enormous resources into their naval programs, creating fleets of unprecedented size and power. This arms race extended beyond the seas. On land, European nations were building larger armies and developing new weapons with frightening efficiency. The German army grew from 400,000 men in 1871 to over 800,000 by 1914. France expanded its military service requirements. Russia built up its forces along its western borders. Each nation justified its military expansion as a necessary response to the threats posed by its neighbors. The atmosphere of competition and mistrust that militarism created was like a slow-burning fire. Citizens of these nations began to see military strength as a source of national pride and security. Newspapers celebrated naval launches and military parades. Young men viewed military service as an honor and a duty. This militaristic mindset made the idea of war seem more acceptable, even inevitable. As we drift deeper into this historical exploration, let's turn our attention to the second major factor that shaped the path to war: the complex web of alliances that connected European nations. Imagine a spider's web, delicate but strong, where touching one strand sends vibrations throughout the entire structure. In the 1870s, European diplomacy was dominated by Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany. Bismarck understood that Germany's position in the heart of Europe made it vulnerable to attack from multiple directions. His solution was to create a careful balance of alliances that would isolate France, Germany's primary rival, while maintaining peace with other major powers. The first cornerstone of this system was the Three Emperors League, formed in 1873 between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. This alliance linked the three great conservative monarchies of Eastern Europe in a commitment to mutual support and stability. When this arrangement proved unstable due to Russian and Austrian competition in the Balkans, Bismarck crafted a new solution. In 1879, Germany and Austria-Hungary signed the Dual Alliance, a secret agreement that committed each nation to support the other if it were attacked by Russia. This alliance would prove to be one of the most durable and significant in European history, lasting until both empires collapsed in 1918. 3 years later, in 1882, Italy joined this partnership, creating the Triple Alliance. Italy's inclusion strengthened the Central Powers and provided Germany with an ally on France's southern border. The Triple Alliance was renewed regularly throughout the 1880s and 1890s, creating a stable bloc of mutual defense in the heart of Europe. But Bismarck's carefully constructed system began to unravel after his dismissal in 1890. The new German leadership, led by Kaiser Wilhelm II, chose not to renew the secret reinsurance treaty with Russia. This decision pushed Russia to seek new partnerships and fundamentally altered the balance of European power. In 1894, France and Russia signed the Franco-Russian Alliance, a military agreement that committed each nation to support the other if it were attacked by Germany. This alliance created exactly the situation that Bismarck had worked so hard to prevent. Germany now faced the possibility of a two-front war. The final piece of the alliance system fell into place in 1904, when Britain and France signed the Entente Cordiale. This agreement wasn't a military alliance, but rather a settlement of colonial disputes and a commitment to friendly cooperation. The Entente resolved tensions over Egypt, Morocco, and other colonial issues that had brought the two nations close to war in previous decades. In 1907, Britain and Russia signed a similar agreement, resolving their disputes over Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet. This Anglo-Russian Entente completed what became known as the Triple Entente, linking Britain, France, and Russia in a loose partnership that balanced the Triple Alliance. By 1907, Europe was divided into two opposing camps, each suspicious of the other's intentions. The alliance system, originally designed to preserve peace through balance and deterrence, had instead created a situation where any local conflict could rapidly escalate into a continental war. Like a chain reaction, obligations to allies could pull peaceful nations into conflicts they had never sought. These alliances also created a dangerous psychology of inevitability. Military planners in each nation began to assume that any war would involve their alliance partners. This assumption led to strategies that depended on rapid mobilization and aggressive action, making diplomatic solutions more difficult to achieve once tensions began to rise. As we continue our gentle journey through this complex historical period, let's explore the third major factor that contributed to the growing tensions: imperialism. Picture a world map from 1900, where vast portions of Africa, Asia, and the Pacific are coloured in the distinctive hues of European colonial empires. The late 19th century was the age of the new imperialism, when European powers carved up much of the world's unclaimed territory. This expansion was driven by a combination of economic interests, national pride, and strategic considerations. Colonies provided raw materials for industrial production, markets for finished goods, and symbols of national greatness. Britain possessed the largest empire in human history, stretching from Canada to Australia, from India to South Africa. The British Empire covered 1/4 of the world's land surface and included 1/4 of its population. This vast domain generated enormous wealth and gave Britain strategic advantages in global trade and naval power. France had built the second largest colonial empire, with territories in West Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. French colonies provided tropical products like rubber and coffee, while French culture and language spread across the globe. The French took particular pride in their civilizing mission, believing they were bringing the benefits of French culture to less developed regions. Germany, unified only in 1871, arrived late to the imperial game, but sought to make up for lost time. German colonies in Africa and the Pacific were smaller and less profitable than those of Britain and France, but they represented Germany's growing power and ambitions. Many Germans believed their nation deserved a colonial empire commensurate with its industrial and military strength. The scramble for colonies created numerous opportunities for conflict. In Africa, European powers rushed to claim territory before their rivals could establish control. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885 attempted to regulate this competition, but tensions remained high as boundaries were drawn and redrawn across the continent. One of the most serious imperial crises occurred in 1898 at Fashoda, a remote outpost in the Sudan. British and French forces confronted each other over competing claims to the Upper Nile Valley. For several tense weeks, war seemed possible as both nations refused to back down. The crisis was eventually resolved through diplomatic negotiation, but it demonstrated how colonial competition could bring European powers to the brink of conflict. Morocco became another flashpoint for imperial rivalry. France sought to establish a protectorate over this North African kingdom, but Germany challenged French ambitions. The First Moroccan Crisis of 1905-1906 saw Kaiser Wilhelm II visit Tangier to demonstrate German interest in Moroccan independence. The crisis was resolved at the Algeciras Conference, but it increased tensions between Germany and France. The Second Moroccan Crisis of 1911, also known as the Agadir Crisis, proved even more dangerous. When France moved to establish greater control over Morocco, Germany sent a gunboat to the port of Agadir to protect German interests. British support for France during this crisis helped solidify the Triple Entente, while German resentment over the outcome further poisoned relations between the alliance systems. Imperial competition also extended to the Ottoman Empire, often called the sick man of Europe. As Ottoman power declined, European nations sought to gain influence over strategic territories like the Dardanelles and the Suez Canal. Russia's desire for access to the Mediterranean through the Turkish Straits conflicted with British and French interests in maintaining the balance of power in the Middle East. The psychology of imperialism created a climate where national prestige was measured by territorial acquisition and colonial success. Newspapers celebrated imperial victories and denounced foreign interference in their nation's colonial sphere. Public opinion became increasingly nationalistic and suspicious of foreign rivals. This imperial mindset also militarized European thinking about international relations. Colonial administration required military force, and colonial competition created precedents for using military pressure to achieve diplomatic goals. The habits of thought and action developed during the imperial age would prove dangerous when applied to European politics. Now, as we drift deeper into this historical exploration, let's examine the fourth major factor that contributed to the growing tensions: nationalism. Imagine the diverse peoples of Europe in 1900, each with their own languages, customs, and dreams of national greatness. Nationalism was one of the most powerful forces of the 19th century. It represented the belief that people who shared a common language, culture, and history deserved their own independent state. This idea had already transformed Europe through the unification of Germany and Italy, but its work was far from complete. The German Empire, created in 1871, was the newest of the great powers and perhaps the most nationalistic. German nationalism combined pride in recent achievements with anxiety about future challenges. Germans celebrated their victory over France in 1870-1871, their rapid industrial growth, and their contributions to science and culture. Yet they also felt encircled by hostile neighbours and deprived of their rightful place in the world. German nationalism took on an increasingly aggressive tone as the 20th century began. Organisations like the Pan-German League promoted the idea that all German-speaking peoples should be united under German leadership. This vision included not only Germans living in Austria-Hungary, but also German minorities scattered throughout Eastern Europe. French nationalism was coloured by the desire for revenge against Germany. The loss of Alsace-Lorraine in 1871 remained a painful wound in French national consciousness. French schools taught children to remember the lost provinces, and French politicians spoke of the day when these territories would be restored to France. This spirit of revanche, or revenge, kept alive the hope of eventual war with Germany. Russian nationalism was complicated by the multi-ethnic nature of the Russian Empire. Russians took pride in their vast territory and their role as protectors of Orthodox Christianity. Pan-Slavism, the belief that all Slavic peoples should be united under Russian leadership, provided a framework for Russian expansion into the Balkans and Central Europe. British nationalism was more subdued, but equally powerful. The British took quiet pride in their global empire, their naval supremacy, and their constitutional government. British nationalism was less aggressive than that of continental powers, but it was equally committed to maintaining Britain's position as a world power. The most dangerous form of nationalism, however, was found in the Balkans. This region, once firmly under Ottoman control, had become a patchwork of competing national aspirations. Serbia had gained independence in 1878 and dreamed of creating a greater Serbia that would include all South Slavs. This vision directly challenged Austria-Hungary, which ruled over millions of Slavic peoples. Austrian nationalism was defensive in nature, focused on maintaining the unity of the multi-ethnic Habsburg Empire. The empire included Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Croats, Serbs, and many other nationalities. Each group had its own national aspirations, making the empire increasingly difficult to govern. The annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina by Austria-Hungary in 1908 created a particularly dangerous situation. This territory was home to Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, all of whom had different ideas about their political future. Serbian nationalists saw the annexation as a theft of lands that should belong to a greater Serbia. They formed secret societies dedicated to liberating their ethnic brothers from Austrian rule. One of these secret societies was called the Black Hand, officially known as Unity or Death. Founded in 1911, this organization was dedicated to creating a greater Serbia through violent action if necessary. The Black Hand attracted young Serbian patriots who were willing to die for their cause. The rise of ethnic nationalism created a powder keg in the Balkans. Each national group felt threatened by the others and looked to outside powers for protection. Serbia turned to Russia, while Austria-Hungary relied on German support. Any local conflict could quickly escalate into a broader European war. Nationalism also changed the nature of warfare itself. Earlier conflicts had been fought primarily by professional soldiers for limited political objectives. Nationalist wars involved entire populations and sought the complete defeat of the enemy. This total quality of nationalist conflict would become tragically apparent in the war that was approaching. As we near the end of our gentle journey through these historical currents, we come to the immediate trigger that transformed potential conflict into actual war: the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Picture the city of Sarajevo on a warm summer morning in 1914, where an act of violence would change the course of world history. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph and heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. Unlike many members of the Habsburg family, Franz Ferdinand was thoughtful and reform-minded. He understood that the empire's survival depended on finding a way to satisfy the national aspirations of its diverse peoples. The Archduke had developed a plan called trialism, which would have reorganized the empire into three parts: Austria, Hungary, and a South Slav kingdom. This arrangement would have given the empire's Serbian and Croatian populations their own autonomous region, while maintaining the unity of the Habsburg domains. For Serbian nationalists, however, Franz Ferdinand's reform plans posed a serious threat. If the Archduke succeeded in creating a South Slav kingdom within Austria-Hungary, it would be much more difficult to justify Serbian claims to Habsburg territory. The heir to the throne had become an obstacle to Serbian national aspirations. On June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie visited Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The date was particularly significant because it was St. Vitus Day, a Serbian national holiday commemorating the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. The Archduke's visit on this day seemed to many Serbs like a deliberate provocation. The Black Hand had been planning an assassination attempt for weeks. 6 young conspirators were positioned along the route of the Archduke's motorcade, each armed with bombs and pistols. The plot was supported by Serbian military intelligence, though the exact extent of official Serbian involvement remains debated by historians. The first assassination attempt failed when conspirator Nedeljko Chabrinović threw a bomb at the Archduke's car, but it bounced off and exploded under the following vehicle. Franz Ferdinand was unhurt, but several bystanders were wounded. The motorcade continued to the town hall, where the Archduke delivered a speech and attended a reception. After the reception, Franz Ferdinand decided to visit the wounded in the hospital. His driver, unfamiliar with the changed route, took a wrong turn and stopped the car directly in front of Gavrilo Princip, one of the conspirators. The 19-year-old Bosnian Serb stepped forward and fired 2 shots. One bullet struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck, while the other hit Sophie in the abdomen. The Archduke's last words were reportedly, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children." Both Franz Ferdinand and his wife died within minutes of the shooting. The assassination had succeeded, but its consequences would far exceed anything the conspirators had imagined. The immediate reaction to the assassination was one of shock and mourning throughout Europe. Franz Ferdinand had been widely respected as a man of peace and reform. His death removed one of the few voices in the Habsburg court that advocated for moderation and compromise. Austria-Hungary's response to the assassination was swift and decisive. The empire's leaders, particularly Foreign Minister Leopold Berchtold and Chief of Staff Konrad von Hötzendorf, saw the assassination as an opportunity to solve the Serbian problem once and for all. They were determined to use the crisis to crush Serbian nationalism and restore Austrian prestige. On July 5, 1914, Germany gave Austria-Hungary what historians call the blank check, a promise of German support regardless of what action Austria-Hungary chose to take against Serbia. This guarantee emboldened Austrian leaders to take a hard line against Serbia, knowing that German military might would back them up. The Austrian ultimatum to Serbia, delivered on July 23, 1914, was deliberately harsh. It demanded that Serbia suppress all anti-Austrian propaganda, dismiss officials who promoted Serbian nationalism, and allow Austrian investigators to participate in the inquiry into the assassination. The ultimatum was designed to be unacceptable, providing Austria-Hungary with a justification for war. Serbia's response, delivered on July 25, accepted most of the Austrian demands, but rejected the most humiliating requirements. The Serbian government offered to submit the dispute to international arbitration, but Austria-Hungary had already decided on war. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The alliance system that had been building for decades now began to operate with mechanical precision. Russia, committed to protecting its Serbian ally, began to mobilize its forces. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austria-Hungary and fearing encirclement, declared war on Russia on August 1, 1914. France, allied with Russia, found itself at war with Germany. Britain, committed to protecting Belgium's neutrality, entered the war when Germany invaded Belgium on August 4, 1914. Within a week of Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia, most of Europe was at war. The assassination of one man had triggered a conflict that would last 4 years and cost millions of lives. The complex web of militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism had finally collapsed into the catastrophe that would be known as the Great War. As we conclude our gentle exploration of these historical currents, it's important to remember that none of these factors alone caused the First World War. Like tributaries flowing into a great river, each element contributed to the final catastrophe. The arms race created an atmosphere of competition and mistrust. The alliance system turned a local conflict into a continental war. Imperial rivalry poisoned relations between the great powers. Nationalism made compromise increasingly difficult. The assassination provided the spark that ignited the accumulated tensions. The tragedy of 1914 was not inevitable. but it was the result of choices made by leaders who believed that military force could solve political problems. In our comfortable modern world, we can look back at these events and see how different choices might have led to different outcomes. The lesson of 1914 is that nations, like individuals, must choose between the path of cooperation and the path of conflict. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember that history is not just a collection of facts and dates, but a story of human choices and their consequences. The events of 1914 remind us that the world we live in is fragile and precious, shaped by the decisions of those who came before us and dependent on the wisdom of those who will come after. In understanding the past, we gain the knowledge necessary to build a better future. Thank you for joining me on this journey back through time. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and feel free to tell us what story you want next. Now, as you close your eyes, I finally sentence you to sleep.